Welcome to GRC Chat. Today our guest is Linda Henman. I'm very happy to have you here today, Linda. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
Before we go into our topic, can you shortly introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, excuse me, I have been a consultant for more than 40 years, and I've helped all kinds of decision makers in all kinds of different industries. So I'm very excited today to talk about the importance of decision making, especially in a risky, quickly changing world.
Yes, that's great to jump into. Let's jump into this topic. What would be some key things that you would like to share about this?
Well, the first thing I want to tell people is that if you want good decisions, you have to hire good decision makers. And people think that they can do this because they've known somebody for a long time, or it's a family member, or some other irrelevant criteria that they use to decide, oh, I can trust this person's decision making. Well, trust and trusting of decision making are two different things. So, for example, my daughter handles my finances. I trust her completely, but I don't trust her to take out my appendix because she's never been trained to do that. But I have a doctor that if I needed that kind of surgery, I would trust that doctor to do that. So when we talk about trust and when we talk about leadership at the top, especially, we kind of bat that word around trust. And I say trust to what? So right now in today's session, I'd like to talk about trust somebody to make the right decision. And excuse me, if you start there, then the rest of it takes care of itself.
Mm, That's actually very interesting because, as you said, we have our close family members or friends and everything that we definitely trust, but do we trust them with certain specific things? That's, I think, indeed people do not always think about. And in this case, of course, for decision making specifically, especially from a organization point of view. What are some then key things that you are looking for or on these leadership or leaders that gives them these qualities? What are some key qualities, key things that people should be looking out for decision making specifically?
Well, the first part of working with a client, I usually go in to help them hire a decision maker. So the board calls me in to help them select a new CEO, for example, or the CEO calls me in to help me select another C-suite executives for the to report to the CEO. And the first thing I look at is critical thinking skills. I measure these by a highly calibrated instrument that you have to be a psychologist to buy this. You can't just go on Amazon and get this. So it's highly validated and it gives me a really clear picture of whether you have the common sense to make good decisions. Because decision making comes, I talk about it in three different buckets. The first one is, do you have common sense? Do you know what's important? Can you separate unimportant from important? The second bucket is how quickly do you learn? So when you're in a new situation, how quickly do you acquire information so that you can make a decision that you've never been forced to make before? And the third one is how do you handle numbers to make decisions? So I want these three scores before I talk about anything else. Your common sense score, your learning ability score, and your quantitative reasoning score. And once I have those and I see them above average, then I start looking at personality traits that either encourage you to use these skills or discourage you from using those skills. Some other things I look at are if it's a new person coming out of college, which I don't do much of that anymore because, as I said, I'm usually in the C-suite doing the hiring. But sometimes when a company asks me to do a succession plan, I'm dealing with some very young people who don't have a lot of experience in the industry in which they're working. So then I'm looking at your track record. Where did you go to school? What did you major in? How fast did it take? Did you go through college? And those kinds of things, because that will be an indication that you will be able to learn quickly. If you went to medical school, for example, you have to learn it at a very fast rate, as opposed to a state school where it's a little bit more relaxed. You don't have to learn at such a fast rate. And that doesn't mean really smart people don't go to those schools, but it just means it's one more thing to consider. So those are the three things I want to. And then I start looking at the personality traits to support these. I want a risk taker, but I don't want a reckless risk taker. So if you qualify on the first three and you're really smart, but you won't take risks, you're not going to be any more successful than the person who takes a lot of risks and isn't very smart. So I want to see a lot of that. Then I want to know how dominant you are. When you know something to be true, do you speak up or do you sit back and hope other people figure out how smart you are? Do you have the guts to put your ideas on the table? And are you confident enough? Do you have high enough self-confidence to do all of those? So those are other traits that I'm looking for. And then, of course, the people skills. You can be the smartest person in the room, willing to take risks and willing to not force your ideas, but to present your ideas in a forceful way. But if you alienate everybody in the building and all your star performers start leaving you, you're not going to be a very good leader with nobody to lead. So that, in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Mm. That's actually sounding very interesting because it's very, very systematic. I think obviously there's this, very, I think, advanced instrument that you are using at the start, but then you of course go more in depth, I think, with more, more nuanced, more, personalized approach from what I understand. And it does sound extremely, like complicated, but with that I have my second question, or the next question rather. So let's say for organizations that are looking to hire decision makers, or looking to evaluate maybe their decision makers, what could be some takeaway points that they can like implement, or they can just get into right away in like as the first steps?
So are you talking about the person applying for the job or the person doing the hiring?
Let's say person doing the hiring.
The person doing the hiring.
Yeah.
Well, the person doing the hiring, and by the way, in the higher up in the organization you go, the less often HR should be making these decisions. HR is fine for collecting resumes and looking at things and make sure that they fulfill the job description and that they have the experience level. But then quickly, once that is all in order, the decisions going forward need to be in the hands of people. First of all, the person to whom this new hire is going to report, and then that person's boss. And if it's at the top of the organization, the CEO or the board of directors. So you want to keep pushing this level up. And I say once you get to the $100,000 mark in hiring, then people other than HR better be looking at this candidate for hire, because the risk is too high after 100,000. And I used to say $100,000. Now I'm kind of leaning towards $200,000 because people are getting paid more, not for entry level, but in certainly the C-suite. A $200,000 base would not be unusual. In fact, it would be a little on the low side for many of the companies that I work for. So if you have a person that is applying for the job and you intend to pay that person $200,000 a year, the cost of a bad hire is going to be 4 times that person's base salary. So that's $800,000, which means you're close to $1 million without factoring in the other thing. So what do I mean by that? If this person is hired and you can't get rid of them for whatever reason, because you've signed a contract or something, that person not only won't make you money, that person will lose you money and will lose your top performers, because no one's going to want to report to this person because this person is lacking something that is needed in the leadership role. And then you're likely to lose customers, and you're likely to have bad relationships with your vendors and your subcontractors. So all of these things go into the cost of a bad hire. Similarly, if you overlook a good hire because you get fixated on something like this person seems too timid, or this person is not forceful enough, or something like that, then you need an outside set of eyes saying, trust me, you should hire this person. So those are the ways that a hiring manager or leader should be thinking. I want to know how smart this person is. And most of all, I want to have a good relationship with the person who's doing the hiring recommendation. So that would be me in my case, that I want to talk to the hiring manager or the highest level. And once that person and I know each other, then I can give the best advice. For example, years ago, I worked with a guy named Jim, CEO of a publicly traded company, and he wanted to hire a guy named Jeff. And on paper, Jeff looked just fine. But when I looked at, because I knew Jim and because I now knew Jeff as a result of the testing, I went back to Jim and I said, if you're desperate, you can hire Jeff, he can do the job. But the man is going to drive you crazy. And he said, why? And I said, because of these reasons. So I said, is a good CFO and would be a good match for most other people, Jim, but not for you. So he said, then I trust you, Linda, I'm going to pass. So that's the kind of relationship the hiring manager wants with a professional doing that. Somebody who knows you will know who will fit into your organization and who will be a good match for you.
That's also, I think, a very important point. Just like people might just be, like good or like capable and, have the potential, but maybe just not in the right culture for your organization. These are, I think, important details to also indeed look into. And with that, I actually don't have any other questions. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, I would like to talk about when I speak on the subject of decision making, I talk about the frames or the traps that leaders, well-intended, smart people fall into. And one is they fail to frame the issue. So they don't separate important from unimportant facts or considerations. So if you think of a frame of a picture like this, then there are things that are in the frame and things that are outside the frame. So a frame on the wall is meant to draw attention to the important part of that picture or plaque or whatever it is, and to put aside all of the irrelevant wall that is around it. So that's the first step or the first trap that leaders fall into that they could avoid. Make sure you are zeroing in on the critical few factors and putting aside the trivial many factors. And the second trap that many fall into is the control trap. That when you ask your team or when you ask a leader to make a decision that makes that person not feel in control, then you've got to push back. Is this because you are afraid of the risks? Is this because you are tethered to the status quo because it was your idea and that do certain things in this way in the first place? So you've got to call attention if you're a coach or a consultant working with a leader. What is these person's control issues? And finally, cognitive overload, that mountains of data came at decision makers when we experienced COVID, and back to the healthcare work that I'm doing recently, that it took really smart leaders to say, I can't read everything. I have to read only those things that are fact-based, essential, and from a trusted peer review source, not somebody on the internet who has an opinion about something. So if the leader can avoid the traps to start with, hire very smart people, and then develop those stars, then you are in good shape for retaining the talent you have and becoming a magnet for the talent you need.
Thank you for that as well. And with that, we are out of our time for unfortunately. So I want to thank you so much once again, Linda, for sharing your opinions and your experience essentially. So, and yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.